Have you ever felt like you were living at a completely different frequency to everyone around you? Not occasionally, not on bad days, but as a persistent underlying sense that the way your mind works doesn't quite fit the world it has been handed. The assumption, when that feeling persists, is that something must be going wrong inside. But what if the opposite is true? By the end of this video, you will understand not just why that inner world stays hidden, but how its most distinctive features can work as genuine advantages in work, creativity, relationships, play, and the way you move through your life. For millions of people, those with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, sensory processing differences, and related profiles, the inner world is not smaller or simpler than the one most people carry. In many ways, it is faster, richer, more vivid, and emotionally saturated. And the gap between what is happening inside and whatever makes it to the surface is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in modern life. Let's begin with something that research consistently surfaces but rarely places front and center. Neurodivergent people often feel more, not less. Emotional intensity, particularly in ADHD, is not simply a clinical symptom. It is a structural feature of how the nervous system processes emotional signals. Feelings arrive faster, register more powerfully, and linger longer than they do in neurotypical experience. The same applies to interest. When something genuinely captures a neurodivergent mind's attention, it does not merely interest them, it absorbs them completely. Researchers refer to this state as hyperfocus, a deep, almost automatic immersion in a subject or task that can sustain itself for hours. Think about what that actually means. While much of the world struggles to maintain concentration on a single piece of work, some neurodivergent minds can enter a state of focused absorption that most people will never access naturally. Studies on deep work and cognitive performance consistently show that this level of sustained, uninterrupted focus is associated with higher quality output, greater creative reach, and more original problem solving. The advantage is real. And what changes when you understand it that way is how you organize your time. Hyperfocus can be cultivated deliberately. You identify the conditions that reliably trigger it, a particular environment, a specific time of day, a sensory cue that signals the brain to drop in, and you arrange your most demanding creative or intellectual work around those conditions. What once felt random becomes something you can reach for intentionally. This applies in play as much as in work. The same capacity for deep absorption that makes hyperfocus professionally valuable makes it a genuine joy and restoration when directed toward a creative hobby, a game, a passion project, or any pursuit that lights the same internal circuit. Now consider the sensory world. Many neurodivergent people experience their environment more intensely than most. Autism and sensory processing differences are often described in terms of overwhelm, and that overwhelm is genuine. But the same sensitivity that makes a crowded, loud environment difficult is the sensitivity that makes the world more textured, more detailed, and more alive than most people ever experience it. This shows up in recognizable ways once you know what to look for. The musician who hears layers within a chord that others miss. The writer who registers the emotional temperature of a room before a word is spoken. The designer who senses immediately that something is visually wrong before they can articulate why. Sensory processing sensitivity research identifies this as heightened responsiveness to environmental input, and it operates in both directions. The difficulty and the richness come from the same source. Managing your sensory environment, then, is not about suppression, it is about calibration. Neurodivergent people who learn to design their own working conditions, choosing their lighting, managing sound, controlling texture and temperature, are not accommodating a limitation. They are deploying careful, informed attention to the environment in which their mind operates best. In any field that rewards noticing what others miss, from research to performance, to craft to design, sensory sensitivity is worth treating as a professional asset rather than a problem to be minimized. One of the most consistent patterns in neurodivergent cognition research is a difference in thinking style that has far-reaching practical implications. Neurotypical thinking tends toward a more linear, step-by-step progression. Neurodivergent thinking, particularly in ADHD and autism, is more associative. One idea triggers three others. Unexpected connections appear between things that most minds treat as entirely separate. This is what researchers classify as divergent thinking, and it is one of the most reliably studied predictors of original creative output. The practical consequence of this is significant. Associative thinkers often underperform in environments that reward strict linear execution and treat tangents as errors. They consistently overperform in environments that reward original synthesis, cross-disciplinary thinking, and the ability to see what is not yet obvious to everyone else. Once you understand about how your mind moves, you can stop forcing it into structures that work against it and start designing your work around how it actually operates. Use mind maps rather than linear lists. Work across several projects in parallel rather than completing them in a rigid sequence. Follow the tangent, because the tangent is frequently where the most original idea was already waiting. Here is something that deserves more attention than it usually receives. A pattern researchers describe as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, an intense emotional response to perceived criticism, rejection, or failure, is one of the most common features of ADHD and one of the least understood from the outside. It is not fragility. It is a nervous system that registers social pain with extraordinary precision. And the same system that makes rejection feel so sharp is the system that makes genuine connection feel profound. Neurodivergent people, when they find their people, their genuinely safe relationships, often invest in those connections with a depth and a constancy that is unusual. The intensity of care, the attentiveness to the other person's inner state, the willingness to move quickly past surface-level interaction, all of this flows from the same emotional profile. The sensitivity that creates difficulty in one context creates something remarkable in another. In relationships, the most useful practical insight tends to be this: neurodivergent people often thrive with directness and explicit communication, not because they lack social understanding. Many autistic people in particular have spent years studying social dynamics with extraordinary thoroughness, but because the cognitive energy required to interpret ambiguous signals is enormous. Eliminating that ambiguity does not work around a limitation. It frees up the full capacity for genuine, deep connection to function at its actual level. Now, here is what explains why so little of the inner world we have been describing ever reaches the surface. Masking is the process by which neurodivergent people, particularly autistic people and those with ADHD, learn to suppress, modify, or conceal their natural responses in order to appear neurotypical. It begins early, often before a person has language for what they are doing, and it can be extraordinarily effective, which is one reason so many neurodivergent people reach adulthood without a diagnosis. But masking carries a cost that is only recently being taken seriously in the research. The cognitive load of constant self-monitoring, managing every facial expression, every conversational response, every sensory reaction in real time is exhausting in a way that rarely shows on the outside. This is one reason neurodivergent people so frequently report disproportionate fatigue after social situations that appeared to everyone watching to go perfectly well. The performance was complete. The performer is depleted. Autistic burnout, a period of deep exhaustion, Withdrawal and loss of previously reliable coping strategies is now understood as a direct consequence of sustained masking without adequate recovery. It is not collapse. It is a system that has been running at unsustainable output, finally demanding rest. The path through this is not to mask more consistently. It is to identify the environments and relationships where masking can be set aside and to treat unmasked time as essential maintenance rather than self-indulgence. Knowing that masking is a choice rather than an inescapable requirement changes the relationship with it permanently. You can mask selectively when the situation genuinely calls for it, and you can unmask in the spaces that are safe and allow those spaces to restore what the performance took. When neurodivergent traits are understood as the features they genuinely are, the question shifts. It moves from how do I function in spite of this to what environments allow this to work at its best. The answer is different for each person, but the research on neurodivergent strengths points consistently towards certain domains. Creative fields, where divergent thinking is rewarded rather than corrected. Technical and analytical work, where deep pattern recognition and sustained focus are exactly what the role requires. Entrepreneurial contexts, where unconventional thinking, high risk tolerance, and the capacity to become wholly absorbed in a vision are engines rather than obstacles. Research environments, where asking the question that nobody else is asking is the entire point of the work. ADHD traits overlap significantly with what researchers associate with entrepreneurial success. Novelty-seeking, rapid idea generation, high energy in the pursuit of a genuine interest, willingness to take calculated risks, and a tendency toward deep commitment to a goal once it has captured the attention. Autism is associated with the capacity for exceptional expertise, precision, pattern recognition, and a consistency around accuracy and thoroughness that is rare and, in the right field, genuinely irreplaceable. The practical work is finding those fields, those teams, those working conditions, and deliberately designing your creative and professional life around what your mind actually does, rather than around what the average environment tends to expect. This is not a workaround. It is a strategy built on an accurate understanding of where your particular strengths perform at their highest level. So what is the hidden inner world of neurodivergent people? It is a world of extraordinary emotional depth and intensity, of sensory richness that the surface never reveals, of thinking that moves fast and wide and makes connections that more linear minds miss entirely, of relationships built on a loyalty and depth that can surprise even the people receiving them. It is also a world that has spent years, often a lifetime, learning to look ordinary, and the toll of that performance is as hidden as everything else. What changes when you stop trying to make the inner world smaller to fit the outside is the question itself. You stop asking what is wrong with how your mind works. You start asking what it does exceptionally well and where in the world that actually matters. For most neurodivergent people, the answer reaches much further than they have ever been told.